population 15 to 64, going to school, getting in the labor force. From 2000 to 2050, the United States will grow about 42%. And that's why I think the congressman's comments about jobs are so critical. Because the good thing is we'll have a growing workforce, growing consumer market, a strong domestic market. Young people come up with great ideas. They're critical to innovation. But our obligation is to provide an economic environment where there are jobs for them. But we'll have about 42%. China's will start to decline about 2030. Some of it has to do with the one-child policy. Some of it has to do with the fact that they have 23 million more boys than girls of marriageable age. And if you want to make a recipe for disaster, there is one. Now, it's probably really good if you're in the prostitution business or the pornography business. And since I live in the San Fernando Valley, I guess I should be in favor of it. Anyway, Europe is going to go down about 25% in their workforce, Korea 30%, Japan 44%. We just have no record of how a society adjusts to this incredible aging and the decline in the workforce. This is something we really have never seen before, and we really don't know what it's going to be like. But we do know that in the last Japanese elections, the issue of population growth became a major issue in the campaign. And that's the first time that I can recall that being a major issue in a very important country's political life. Now, then people say, well, we don't have any room in the United States. So a friend of mine from Nebraska says, you know what, next time they say that, when they're flying over Nebraska, let's push them out. Because people who live in Washington and New York and San Francisco, you know, they don't go very far anyway. They don't understand this is a big country. And not only is it a big country, but most of this country is actually habitable. And as someone married to a Canadian, I can tell you, you get 100 miles north of the Canadian border and it starts getting a little bit nasty. And it's just, the United States has this amazing amount of land. And what's interesting is our agriculture, and this is very important to the entire Pacific Northwest and of course to my adopted home state of California, is we have incredibly efficient agriculture. And we've been able to basically double our production on less land. So we actually have less land in agriculture today, more land in forest than we did in 1949. You can see a lot of land has been set aside for parks. So fundamentally, the urban imprint is actually relatively small. And by the time we get to 2050, our population, basically we would be at, we would have a density 1/6 that of Germany. And there's an enormous opportunity, particularly for the places like the Pacific Northwest, in terms of exporting agricultural surpluses to a growing global population, not just growing, but a growing affluent population that's going to want better quality produce and products from a place like the Pacific Northwest. So this is a great future for the Tacoma area in particular as a place where products and services and agricultural products can be exported. And real estate. Now everyone, I was speaking in Kansas City, the opening of a real estate club of Kansas City, and I said, well, don't you think it should be the Hemlock Society? But the fact is, there's going to be a huge amount of growth in the United States. 100 million more people. I think it's probably going to be a lot of housing. Also, there'll be some industrial space. But we're going to see an enormous growth in the opportunity to grow this country and a great business opportunity in the years to come. So where are we headed inside the U.S.? Well, I think there's several things. One, I think we're going to continue to decluster. In other words, people will continue to move to smaller communities that they feel better about. There'll be shifts to the regions of opportunity. The U.S. will be transformed ethnically, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the attitudes of the new generation coming up, the millennials, basically the children of the boomers. I'm going to talk about something called new localism, which has been referred to already today, and then talk about some of the basic issues that have to be addressed if we're going to get to 400 million with the jobs and wealth creation and upward mobility that we need to have to accommodate that. First of all, most of the growth will continue to take place in suburban areas. That's been the case. When people say, well, we're going to bring the housing to where the jobs are, well, that's where the jobs are. And there's been absolutely no sign that that is changing in any significant way. Most people want to live, probably more than anything else, in a suburb close to a city. Urban population, about 10 to 20% by the surveys. Now, does that mean that cities don't have a future? They have a great future. You're going to have 20 million more urbanites between now and 2050. I think America's cities should be worried about how do they accommodate that growth than trying to say, no, we should have more of it. Because most American cities are not doing all that well in terms of bringing in new people. So I think that there'll be a lot of potential there. There's a group obviously want to live further out. And of course, 35% want to live in the rural communities, but sometimes I wonder what they'll feel once they get there. The big thing here, and this is important for your region, Americans have, in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, Americans were going to the mega regions. The bigger, the better. Now what we're seeing is that the net domestic migration is to smaller communities, and something like 200 to 500,000, which is about in your area. That's what people want. They don't necessarily want to live in a little tiny hamlet, but they want to live in a community that has the urban amenities that they want, the educational amenities, the healthcare amenities that they need, but they want something of a smaller scale. And so what we're seeing is massive outmigration of Americans out of the big super mega regions to other regions. And in the new census report, it's very interesting that Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York all had very, not only considerable outmigration, but very low population growth. People are looking for a sense of community, and when they do, they're very often looking for a community about this size. And what's going to drive a lot of this demand is the millennials. Some people say, well, we're going to have all these empty houses in America in the next 20, 30 years. We built all this housing during the bubble, and then there'll be nobody to go in them. And I always say, well, you know, there are these things called children, and they grow up, and they start to want to have the same things that you have. And so you look at the millennial generation, a little bit bigger than the boomers. That population will start entering their 30s, the age in which they start having children, start having families. That will be a great market for communities like this, places where housing is relatively affordable and where people have a chance to go. Now, they may go and move to Seattle or San Francisco. Very, very hard for them to stay there unless they have very wealthy parents past their 30s in terms of getting enough space to live in. So I think this will continue. And then the other big factor is going to be immigrants. The two big drivers of the next 30, 40 years, millennials and then their children, and immigrants and then their children. And most of the people who come to this country, you know, they don't come here so they can live in a little box. They come here because they want to have the American dream. They want to have a house. And that's why the majority of them live in in suburbs and increasingly are looking at smaller towns.